Hey, welcome to another edition of the Traction Reaction Podcast. Steve Zott here with author Mark Dill. Welcome back to the show. It's good having you. We're kind of in the off season, and a lot of racing fans, me included. One of the things we do is read books, and this is one. I love racing history, and this certainly fills that void. It's a book on Barney Oldfield. And it's not just, there's been other books written on Barney Oldfield, but this one's a little different, Mark. Kind of walk us through how this all came about.
Well, and it Barney Oldfield's just an interesting character. And in my first book, he was a major character in it, and I wanted to really get inside his head. I don't think most people fully understand what was going on with him. I would say even emotionally. Um, so I told the story about the 1914 Cactus Derby, which I think is a really interesting race, and I don't feel that many people know about it. And everything he went through, and he was under a lot of criticism at the time, and he had just finished his championship of the universe where he raced an airplane against Lincoln Beachey, and a couple of years earlier he'd raced, which was very controversial, raced the first black heavyweight boxing champion, Jack Johnson. And there were just a lot of people in the racing world, especially uh, back east, where a lot of the media was. They had a problem with him. They thought he was a huckster and just in it for the money, and in a way, he was.
Yeah, he is an interesting character. A lot of people who might not realize his background in that, and it was certainly different. When he started, of course, as a bicycle racer and that, but I think a lot of people don't realize his age. He was, I mean, truly one of the early pioneers, and some may consider he was a little past his prime by the time racing really started to kind of formulate into closer to what we see today. Which I guess you could start off with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway being built, but I mean, there wasn't the 100-mile state fair races that we see today. I mean, those didn't really start till the mid-teens. So it's interesting about this Cactus Derby. I didn't know a lot of that. That's a kind of it is quite the obscure, um, but interesting his part of racing history. If you think of it, 1914, Arizona had only been a state for a couple of years, and
Right.
I remember I mentioned to Tom Schmay. I was doing some research, and whenever you're doing any type of research, you come across other stuff, and you go down these little rabbit holes. There is one, I don't know if it was the Cactus Derby, but it was one of those point to point races where one of the participants was shot by a rancher. So I mean, it was,
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that one.
yeah. I'll try and find that and try and post that in the notes in
Yeah.
the podcast here.
I mean, there were never more factory teams in the Indy 500 than in the first race, because everybody was new, everybody was trying to establish their brand and so forth, and naturally thought, hey, I need to compete and come out on top, and people are going to buy my cars. And it wasn't until the end of the teens where, typical, a lot of manufacturers said, hey, this is costing us too much money. We don't see the ROI. So a lot of them pulled away.
Walk us through the 1914 race where he's racing for Stutz. Doesn't know that much about racing. May think, oh yeah, Oldfield raced in a bunch of Indy 500s, so that certainly wasn't the case, was it?
No, he only raced in two. And interestingly enough, he finished fifth both times. He was entered in the 1915 race, but the story goes that he got really drunk the night before, and he turned the wheel over to his mechanic, riding mechanic George Hill, who had done some racing. And so if you check the box scores on that race, George Hill, that was the car that Barney was supposed to be in. But he did finish fifth, which is pretty respectable, especially in 1914. And I talk about this in the book. He he came home with the first American car. They were just hopelessly outclassed in general, And, that was, when the Peugeots were so strong. And he just, but he was able to find a way to get into the top five, which, kind of, I remember AJ Foyt saying one year, best in class when
Hmm.
he didn't have the hottest engine.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And he was a larger than life character. That you bring up an anecdote of him and George Robertson, who had won the Vanderbilt Cup, and kind of walk us through how, if Barney was alive today, I kind of liken he'd be probably like a Red Bull driver, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he could have been a stunt driver.
Mhm.
In a way, he was. He was interested in money, and he figured out ways to get it. But it also, he was somewhat conflicted because he'd get all this criticism, and he's like, well, "Wait a minute, I'm a damn fine race car driver," and really, that had a lot to do with why he decided to run this race. Because, as the title of the book suggests, the big award was master driver of the world,
Hmm.
and he wanted that medal. And he also was conscious of Ralph De Palma. He and De Palma were huge rivals, and De Palma beat Oldfield more times than not. But um, they would get in match races, and just the two of them, and have wheel to wheel. And Oldfield would, that he wasn't a guy that took a ton of risks, really, and that's one of the reasons why he lived through that era. But when it came to beating De Palma, he would stick it all on the line. And so getting that particular medal was important to him because he felt he could kind of rub it in Ralph's face. So that got him attracted to it. And it was a brutal race. I mean, you're talking like 730 miles, and that, there really wasn't, you could call it a road race, but it was just, they were creating the roads as they went along, which, to your point earlier, Arizona had just been admitted as a state. And that's something I try to communicate in the book, that this era is sort of the remnants of what they called the Wild West.
Certainly was.
And the Native Americans were trying to get a foothold in a society that was ran by their uh, Caucasian Eurocentric uh, rivals, and their cultures were so different they didn't understand one another. So they were trying to find their role in that society, and that's one of the sort of subplots of the book, if you will.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned also Lincoln Beachey. That's he's in one of the photos. He's uh, being, of course, a fan of the Milwaukee Mile. Lincoln Beachey did an aerial race at Milwaukee also, and he was a kind of a famous character. Give us a little background on him. He's a really interesting person.
Yeah, I mean, he was really the first superstar. I mean, the other aviators he was kind of like Barney. Other aviators were pretty straightforward, and they would test equipment, and beginning with the Wright brothers, obviously, but Glenn Curtis was another one. And Beatty took a different tack. He became a stunt pilot, and he was the first driver to do the loop, which, when you think about those contraptions they were in,
Oh,
the
exactly.
propeller was right behind him. He was either sitting in a chair or sometimes laying on the wing, and obviously no seat belts. It's like flying a kite, a motorized kite, a mile up in the air. And so it seemed inevitable that he was gonna overstep at some point. He was only 28 when he lost his life at the Pan American Festival, or whatever they called it,
Mhm.
in the Bay Area.
And the forward was written by our friend Willie T. Ribbs. How did that come about?
Well, Willie and I have really formed a tight bond, and we talk. I mean, just as friends, we talk several times a week, and we see things very similarly, so we get along, and on a wide range of subjects. And he, one of his two favorite boxers, and you may know Willie did dabbled in boxing, as did Barney Oldfield, uh, were of course Muhammad Ali, who he knew, and then Jack Johnson. And I'd have to say, if I'd pick two boxers that fascinate me, it'd be those two. And Jack Johnson, right in the middle of the era that I study. Um, he thought he thought he could drive pretty fast. I mean, he just another guy. He's cocksure of himself. And he was running around different race meets trying to get. He had a big Thomas racer, and he's trying to challenge people. He's challenged De Palma, and a lot of them like no, no. And frankly, it the and you read about it. In fact, Jack London pops up in my book. I mean, Call of the Wild, that was a great book, but Jack had a lot of problems with black people, and he didn't, hesitate to express himself, as did most in that era. And so he followed Jackson's career as a boxer, and was frankly delighted when he lost to I don't know, Jim Jeffries.
Okay.
And I think I went off on a rant there, but so anyway, they ended up racing. Barney took him up on it, and he took the angle that, well, wait a minute, I'm okay with this. I think we can make money out of this. And so they tried to promote this event, but honestly, the public wasn't interested. And again, I think a lot of it had racist overtones.
Hmm.
And they had a lot of trouble pulling it off because it rained. It was at Shepherd's Bay, and it rained and two or three times and kind of postponed the event. So then they finally pulled it off. And frankly, no surprise, Barney was a skilled race car driver, and Jack Johnson was at best an enthusiastic amateur. And I think it actually, that contest convinced Johnson, hey, I better stick to boxing or find other ways to make money. But going back to Beachey, that happened. The Johnson thing happened in 1910. The Beachey contest, which was a national tour, and that was in the summer of 1914. And those guys, the story goes, those guys collected between $400,000 and $500,000. And that was a fortune back then.
Hmm.
And in fact, Barney took some of that or most of it and bought himself a mansion in Beverly Hills. He was always trying to fit into the upper crust of society. And frankly, they kind of laughed at him because he just culturally, he didn't fit in. He was one of the last guys born in a log cabin, and just kind of really hard scrabble life.
Yeah, it certainly was. Ended up owning a bar uh,
Yeah.
in California.
Oldfield's Liquor Room, and I want to check that out because there's an Oldfield's Liquor Room in L.A.
Hmm.
And I'm like, was that the actual site of his bar? I don't know, and I want to check that out.
Yeah, we need to chat with our friend Bobby Green on that one. So he would
Okay.
definitely know. So, yeah, well, thank you. Really appreciate you taking time out once again. The book, Master Driver of the World, would it deals about the 1914 Cactus Derby, but also kind of gives you a look in Barney Oldfield and his personality.
Yeah, started in L.A. and it ended in Arizona, and again, I think I said it earlier, 730 miles, and the terrain was. Um, did you get a chance to read it? I'm just,
Oh yeah,
I don't mean to put you on.
what I
Did,
like about it, it puts you back into that time, which is not easy to do. Um,
yeah,
and it's probably one of the best books to do that since the Outlaw Sprint Car Driver, the Johnny Gerber book, because it was people don't realize the yeah, the Wild West is, the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, but I mean, you're talking, there's a section in here, Needles, California. You want to talk about boondocks? That was in the middle of nowhere. And like
Yeah.
the one, I'll look it up, in that other race where a fellow was actually shot by a rancher. Yeah, they were basically making their own roads.
Yeah. I mean, the, the contest for land had largely been settled, but the ways of the people in the area hadn't certainly was did not have a wholesale change. They were still gunfighters, and in fact, there were still little battles between Native Americans and settlers, even at that time. I think it was up in around 1920 before that kind of dissipated. So yeah, thank you. I wanted to tell the story so people would. I don't think if you don't know the context, I don't think you can really understand what was going on, the motives,
Mhm.
the challenges and all that stuff.
Well, certainly I'll look back into it, and people have to realize, decisions that were made 100 years ago were made on a, different world, and different judgments, everything. You can't take what somebody says 100 years ago, because there was a different train of thought. Call it
Yeah,
enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it. It was a different world, and Barney came from that world, but he's certainly an interesting character from that world, and
yeah,
he's one of my favorites, because I always like, kind of like a person that goes by their own rules, and he was certainly one of them, wasn't he?
yeah. He was, and um, I know what you're saying. As far as his, um, he was right at that tipping point where you were going into uh, fully organized auto racing,
Hmm.
and he lived a bit in that era, and then he retired in 1919 and became a Firestone executive, and Harvey Firestone had him used his name for a brand of tires. They won the 1920 Indy 500, so he had quite the life. He was one of those guys, and we see him today, who retires and finds a way of carving out a business just based on his brand and his reputation from the years he was fully active.
Yeah, I'll post it on the video here, on an overlay here. But one of his last PR appearances was at the Milwaukee Mountain, 1946, where he
Oh, really?
yeah, where he appeared with Andy Granatelli, who was running that JATO rocket machine.
Really? I didn't know that Oldfield
Yeah,
and Granatelli crossed
yeah,
paths.
yeah. There's a famous shot from the Al Krause collection. I'll post that, and I'll send you a copy also. So
Yeah, please. I gotta imagine Andy was pretty young.
yeah, he was. Well, how does someone get this book?
Oh, well, thank you. I guess that's a good question. Um, I've got my own author site, markgdill.com. That's where you can get an autograph copy. And then also you can get it directly from the publisher, which is bookbaby.com/store. And you'll find it there. Interestingly, and the vagaries of the business, I won't claim I fully understand, but Amazon and the other major retailers are going to make it generally available on Christmas Day. So
Okay.
thanks, guys. It didn't help the holiday season sales, but if you buy it from me or the publisher, I get a lot more money. Amazon just, you know,
They want their cut.
they get a big one. But honestly, like with my first book, that's where I sold the bulk of, of my books.
And are
So,
those books still available too?
oh yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. And you can get one of those on my website, or
okay.
um, it's available Amazon and uh, Barnes and Noble. And I'm particularly proud that Blackwell's in England, and apparently they're going to pick up this book
Oh,
too. But
that's
I just didn't expect that at all.
yeah.
and I got an email from them saying, "We're carrying your book." And I was like, and there's a lot of people in the UK that contact me, "How do I get it?" And so it's convenient to say, "Hey, Blackwell's," because
Mhm.
everybody in the UK knows Blackwell's.
Yes, they certainly do. And for those interested, you can look at my YouTube page and see my previous interviews I've done with Mark with his extraordinary books. He's also written before, so feel free to look that up. Mark,
Cool.
certainly appreciate you taking time out with us. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. It's really interesting, and like I said, it takes you back to a time to the genesis of auto racing, really, and it takes you back into that time. And Barney Oldfield is one of my favorite characters, and I certainly appreciate it. And I think the readers will too.
Thank you so much, Steve.
All right, thank you.